I am at the Boston Common one more time. As you can see behind me, there's groups of tourists. People come from all over the world to see these sites, which are so important in our nation's history. Behind me is a really fancy looking state house. That's the Massachusetts State House, state capitol. In front of me is really nasty construction, which you might be able to hear in a minute, but the construction is actually why I'm here, because it's the Lafayette Mall. So one of the most well-trafficked parts of the Common is called the Lafayette Mall. Mall not meaning like shopping center, but like a long greenway where you can walk. And it's called the Lafayette Mall after the Marquis de Lafayette, who was one of the biggest figures of the American Revolution, but he wasn't American, which is kind of shocking. He was French. So in a way, one of our founding fathers was a French guy. The Marquis de Lafayette was definitely a one-percenter. He came from an extremely wealthy, aristocratic family with a long military history. So his came from a long line of kind of military heroes. He always knew that he was also going to be in the military. You know, family honor was very important to him. And he, you know, like a lot of educated men in the 1700s, you know, he was part of the Age of Enlightenment. So even though he was an aristocrat who was a wealthy person, he had learned about these ideas of liberty and equality, and he really took that to heart. So when he found out about American colonists rising up against the British, he was kind of like, number one, I hate the British because I'm French, which is true, they hate each other. And number two, you know, right on. Unfortunately, both his parents and the military and the American colonists were like, no, that's a terrible life plan, don't do that. But he did not listen to them. With his own money, he paid for his ship. He went to the colonies and he talked the American leaders into making him a major general, because he was basically so passionate, so enthusiastic. And in fact, they were really glad that they did that. He fought at Bunker Hill. He spent the winter with Washington at Valley Forge. He actually was injured in battle, and Washington made sure that he got good care from doctors, and that created a friendship between them and a bond that lasted their whole lives. He went back and forth to France several times, and he got support from the French government. After the war ended, I actually love this, in his house on Monday nights, he would have these really fancy dinners, and he would entertain his American friends who were in Paris at the time. So like Thomas Jefferson, John and Abigail Adams, Benjamin Franklin, those are all people who would go over to the Marquis de Lafayette's house. So it's kind of strange to think about, you know, these like super democratic Republican leaders eating at this French aristocrat's house, but that's totally what happened. He was so into these ideas about liberty and equality that when his own country started a revolution, the French Revolution, at the beginning of it, he was really enthusiastic about it, because he thought that he was going to be able to implement the ideas and the values and ideals that he had fought for the Americans, and now he was going to get to do it in his own country. So he was really pro French Revolution until they started chopping people's heads off, at which point he was like, too much, guys, it's too much when, you know, this is happening in the Place de la Concorde all the time. So the fact that he was not pro the revolution in the eyes of the revolutionaries meant that he was against the revolution. So this guy who had fought for liberty and equality for his entire life actually became imprisoned for years because he was not for the extremists. And the Americans did try to help him. Congress sent money. There was a spy at one point that got him out of jail through a secret like carriage in a back way, and he got lost and got in prison again, which is terrible. He and his wife by that time had many children, and their son was named George Washington, and they sent the son, George Washington, to go live with George Washington. who sheltered him for a long time while his parents were in jail. And his wife, out of loyalty, actually came to the jail with him just so that she could be there. And the daughters had the cell next door. So it was a really tragic period in his life. And afterwards, he was just never fully respected or honored in France the way that he was here. So when he was older, when his friend Washington died, Napoleon threw this huge celebration and did not invite Lafayette, who had been Washington's really, really close personal friend. When he was a very, very old man, he came back to the U.S. And by this point, it was a country that had had multiple presidents, not like the colonies that he had fought for. And everywhere he went, there were parades, there were crowds, and people loved him, because he was a symbol of all of the good parts of the revolution. He was dashing, he was brave. By this time, he was, an old man with a French accent. I'm sure he, probably sounded very genteel. And when he came here to Boston, they were building a monument on Bunker Hill. So he laid the cornerstone of that monument, and he took out of the ground a handful of dirt. And when he died, that same handful of dirt, they sprinkled it over his grave. So this is another symbol, you're really into symbolic gestures then. And the last kind of symbolic gesture, and this really gets me because you can't make this stuff up. And it really shows how Americans have always felt about the Marquis de Lafayette. During World War I, so centuries after the Revolution, very long time after he died, during World War I, on July 4th, American troops are in Paris in 1917. This is 1917, July 4th, and American troops arrive there. It's a huge celebration because for us, this is our Independence Day. And they march through the streets and they go to the grave of the Marquis de Lafayette, and this American colonel goes to the grave and he says, "Lafayette, we are here." I mean, come on. So I think that, Americans, you can see it in our recent history of World War I and World War II. I think Americans, at some level, never forgot the role that the French played in supporting us during the American Revolution. And they never forgot the efforts of somebody like the Marquis de Lafayette. Quite frankly, he's a wealthy aristocrat. He didn't have to do anything, but he made a lot of personal sacrifices. So that is the Marquis de Lafayette.